Let's return to our data and consider the situation where we want to see how each of our salespeople performed over each of the quarters. To see that, we'll need to see the quarters, the salespeople, the hardware sales, and support fees figures. We're going to create a pivot table from scratch to answer this question. So I'll make sure first of all that I'm clicked somewhere in the data table, and I'll click the Insert tab on the ribbon and choose Pivot Table. First of all, I need to confirm the table or range that contains my data, and this is correct. Then I need to choose where I want the pivot table to be placed, and I want it on a new worksheet, so I'll leave this option selected and click OK. We're now ready to create our pivot table, but if we look at this, we might find this as being very confusing. So I suggest you ignore this for now and concentrate on the list that we're more familiar already with using. And what I want to do first of all is to decide exactly which of the fields I wanted to see, but we already determined that before we left the table, and we want quarter and salesperson, hardware sales, and support phase. And you can see that Excel has created the pivot table for us, and we don't really need to know much about the design that was underneath here, where we could have created it ourselves by dragging and dropping. This is an easier way generally to create pivot tables. Now what we're seeing here is quarter one and each of the salespeople, how they performed in quarter one. So we can compare each salesperson with each other salesperson within quarter one. And then we could do that for quarter two and quarter three and quarter four. Now that'll be useful if that's what we want to do. But what if we want to look at, for example, James Smith and see how he compared to himself? What figures did he make in quarter one and quarter two and quarter three? This pivot table isn't yet showing us exactly that detail. It will, however, if we reverse these two fields. So I'm going to order first of all by salesperson. So here's James Smith, and now we can compare James Smith's results for the 4 quarters. Now that we've done that, let's change the pivot table to answer another question. Let's ask the question, how much did the Oregon location sell in hardware sales and support fees for quarter one? So this time we want the quarters and hardware sales and support fees, but instead of people, we want locations. So I'm going to turn off people and I'm going to turn on locations. And here's quarter one, and we could read off what Oregon sold. But if we wanted to print this as a report, we wouldn't want all this extraneous data. So we can filter it down so that we see only the Oregon data. To do that, I'm going to click this row labels option, and first of all, I'm going to select the quarter that I want to see, and that will be quarter one. And I'll click OK. And you can see that we're now seeing the data for just quarter one. But I can filter it even further to see Oregon alone. To do that, I'll click on the filter button again, and from this drop-down list, I'll select location. And when I select location, I can select just the state that I want to look at, which is Oregon, and then I'll click OK. And now the pivot table is showing us exactly the data that we want to see. When I'm ready to undo this filter, the easiest way of getting rid of all of that is to click the Home tab on the ribbon and choose Sort and Filter and then Clear. And that clears all the filters from my pivot table.